Hey Dad, how are you today?
Well, we're doing pretty good. We're down here in Ottawa, outside of Ottawa, and we're kind of all in hibernation right these days, but doing pretty good. So we want to kind of go back memory lane a little bit, Amy, and we'll go back into my childhood a little bit, see if we can pick up some memories and tidbits of life and journey.
Yeah, I was thinking when you posted the picture about the old homestead, it'd be nice to have a little conversation about it, just to go back over those
Yeah.
years.
Well, actually, I was born in Ottawa. My mom and dad were they were pretty poor. They didn't have any money to live on their own, and they actually moved into with my great grandfather, Grandpa McDonald, he was called, and that was in LeBreton Street in Ottawa. My mother she was doing several jobs, working for a cafeteria and a kitchen, and my father worked, I think, about three different jobs. Drove a bulldozer and filled a boiler, and they were a very, very, very busy couple. I had two older sisters, and my aunt, who was only a teenager, she would come and babysit for us and get supper ready, and mother was off working, and I was just a little Skyper guy. And my old Grandpa McDonald, I kind of have this faint picture of him. They had some chickens out at the back. It was a pretty primitive little home. They were living together, trying to make their ends meet with three little children. And he used to get me up on his lap and read me this old Family Herald. Still have this picture looking at chickens and animals, and not too sure much of a relationship what I had with him, but that was way back in LeBreton Street. But my father actually grew up in the country in outside of Ottawa, a place called Medcalf, very rural farm, few cows and pigs and horses. He loved to go to the farm every weekend. He'd try and get out there, go to the farm, and get out. And my mother would go with him all the time. And of course, we as the children would pack up in an old car, pretty cold, head out there. It was a pretty big journey back of that day in those old, I'm not too sure, but about a 1934 Ford. You can have a rumble seat in the back. You could actually sit in the back seat. I don't ever remember sitting back there, but I was getting back there. And we'd go to the farm, and I love the farm. Oh my, I love to go out there. My aunt Pearl lived up in a bush, literally in the bush, no electricity, just lanterns. And you had to go down to the well and throw your pail down in and tip it just a certain way, because I remember as a boy, she'd say, "Now go get me a pail of water, Jerry." And I'd go down there and I'd have to learn how to swing that pail down, drop down in this deep well and scoop up the water. Of course, I was just a little raft of a lad. Then try and haul that big cold pail of water up the hill. Usually lost about half of the water by the time I got there. It was quite a challenge, but boy, it was a lovely episode. Loved to sit around there at nighttime. They would get the lanterns out, big old, one of those great big wooden cook stoves, kitchen wood stoves, and she'd cook up cakes and all kinds of delicious food. When you get the crokinole board out, it was like going back in time. And then even when my father eventually did rent a house in Greeley, which was not too far from the farm and Medcalf and from Pearls. It was a very, very, very primitive home. There was no insulation in it, and there was no running water in it. We had an outhouse out the back. They had what they used to call these old country kitchens. It was like a kitchen for the summertime and a kitchen for the wintertime. And the country kitchen kind of was a cooler place, I guess. If they did cook, it didn't heat up. They had these big wood stoves that would heat up the house, and so they could go to these country kitchens. And so we moved in there. I was just, I don't know how old I would have been, a little, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Remember going out to the outhouse, and actually my mother she had a big tin tub, and that's where we would have our bath. And she'd heat up water on the stove and heat up. I'd crawl in this big tin tub out in the country kitchen and have a bath.
Hmm.
And my father eventually got some heat in the place. He got an old oil stove. Had to be careful about lighting them, because if you had a little bit of light, a little bit of oil go in, and then you dropped a match down in the thing, and if you got too much oil in there, fire would go out, and it was a real problem. Most of the time we were pretty cold. Never wore bare feet in your house because your feet were freezing all the time. But it was my home. I grew up running the roads or Greeley as a little kid. Never thought myself being poor by any stretch of the means.
Mm.
Just, of course, everybody else was,
Is that kind of
most,
the way most of the people around were kind
yeah,
of that
most
living
people,
standard?
most level. There was a few people that were, had a bungalow and a garage. Anybody that had a garage back there for like a single car garage was pretty well considered pretty rich. And but this was a big 2-story house, big high house. My little bedroom was up at the top and kind of in the ceiling, kind of the roof came down, and it was like a big open room and stairs. So anybody went up to their bedrooms, they all always came through my room. But I was a happy little kid. Loved to read. My sister read books to me, and
Is that Patsy or Judy?
that was Patsy. Patsy was she was my reader.
Hmm.
Alibaba and the 40 Thieves was my favorite story. Read that to me. Patsy, can you read that story to me?
Hmm.
That was a favorite one. I think she kind of got pretty tired of reading the same story over and over again. But in the midst of all that, my father, he was a dog lover,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he always liked to bring a dog home. It was probably a free old tramp or something. Somebody found it, or so we get another dog, beagles and all kinds of collies and whatever. But one day he brought home a little tiny pup, a little baby pup, and that was the big treat for me. It was like my own personal little dog. So we named him Toby.
Hmm.
I'd watched a Walt Disney movie called Toby Tyler, a little boy that ran off of the circus, and I thought, I'm going to name my little dog Toby. And he was just a tiny little dog, kind of like a Chihuahua, pointy ears, and he had a nice little white marking on his nose and a curly tail. And Toby and I became bosom buddies.
Hmm.
He became my pal that everywhere I went. Back in that day, you didn't have a leash on a dog, and dogs get up in the morning and ran all over town and came back home. Toby and I were inseparable. He slept in my bed every night, crawled under the sheets, slept right by my feet.
Hmm.
Precious, precious memories. As a little boy growing up,
What
kind of
kind of
think,
what kind of
sometimes,
dog was it?
oh, he was kind of like a little Chihuahua. He
Oh,
wasn't
that's
very
yours.
big,
Yeah.
small, pointy ears, a little curly tail, black and white. And
Hmm.
he was a tiny little skip of a thing. But he would run along. I would have my bicycle. We'd go back in the woods together and, find a creek and try and catch a minnow or something. And Toby would be there watching me the whole time. Sometimes I'd throw him in the creek, and he never liked swimming. Fond memories of I have my upbringing,
How long did you have
lessons
Toby
of
for?
life, taking care of a dog when I was a
Yeah.
little boy.
How many years did you have Toby for?
Oh, Toby, he lasted a long time. I was a teenager. One time Toby became kind of had to face euthanasia. But
Oh, really? Got to the
yeah,
end.
that was a tough thing for me as a teenager, because, well, I wasn't maybe a young teenager, maybe 12 or 13.
Oh, yeah. He's young.
And Toby had gotten very old, and he was starting to snap at people and bite, and
Hmm.
I don't know what was wrong, but I said, well, Toby, one day, I really think it's time for you and me to part ways. And not a very nice story, but I went and got my friend's .22 rifle and dug a hole and kind of said a prayer for Toby and said goodbye and buried him.
You had to shoot him yourself.
Yeah, I shot him myself with my
Oh,
own gun.
Dad, that's horrible.
Well, back in that day, you couldn't take him to a vet or,
Yeah. But somebody else couldn't have done it for you? Oh,
well, the difficult situation is my father, he complained about the dog. Complaining, oh, old Toby's no good anyway. Or somebody would shoot him, get rid of him, And
right.
so, and my mother would be, well, oh dear, I don't want that to happen around here.
So you felt
So,
responsible.
everybody was away one day. I said, well, I think we'll have to face this up together, boy. So it was one of those, hard moments of your young life, saying goodbye to a little dog. We had I think probably one of my first prayers I ever prayed was over Toby because we had horses also, and that's a whole other episode of my life. But Toby was running around. We had this horse that was pretty wild, and we had her out in a corral, and she was running around. And Toby, he went out and decided to have a game of tag with her, and was chasing after her. And lo and behold, if she didn't kick him right in the head and just sent him flying, and he was lying there on the ground. I thought he was dead. I was just a little guy. I thought, oh no, Toby. Went and picked him up, dragged him out of the corral, laid him on the ground, and he was lying there. And that was probably my first prayer, one of those I ever prayed, maybe that I actually remember saying, oh God, crying tears, crying out for my little
Your
dog.
little dog.
I'm
Oh.
lying there. I thought he's dead. And sure enough, either the merciful God heard my prayer or he started shaking and his little legs began to move and kind of staggered around and looked at me like his eyes were pretty draggy looking. I thought, oh my God, he's alive. He's alive. Toby's alive. Jumped around. Ever since after that day, Toby would, every once in a while, he'd have these seizures, and probably from a kicking a horse, from the horse kicking him in the head was
Oh, yeah.
pretty serious. I had my father had a cousin that had been kicked by a horse, and in his head, Floyd Wallace, and as a boy, and he was never the same. He was like a
Oh, wow.
handicapped boy the rest of his life.
Oh,
When a horse uses their back legs to kick, it kill you. They're so powerful.
wow.
But Toby survived, lived a long health. Well, most of the time he was healthy, other than from those seizures. Every time he'd have one, I'd have another prayer time.
Oh,
He'd kind of shake
so
and
scary for a kid.
stagger around, and I'd rub his chest and hold on to him, and
Oh, dear.
he'd make it through. It's dramatic when you have a child. It's kind of like when you have a pet. Every child, if they have a pet, there's the life and death series of pets. They come and go, and I don't know. Maybe perhaps in a farm, maybe it's more of a common thing than most children face.
Yeah.
Kind of the reality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you guys growing up, never had any pets
No.
other than my mom and my father's dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if any of you really connected closely with any of them. We were traveling so much.
Yeah, no, we definitely weren't raised with animals.
That was a crazy little story. Crazy little story about my dog Toby.
Yeah. But I do remember Poppy always having dogs, the golden retriever lab mix lady. He'd call them all lady. I remember that for sure. But
yeah, he got to the place actually later in his life whenever one would have to be put down or one would die, and then he said, "Oh, I can't do this anymore." It was getting too hard on him, losing them because he got so attached to them.
Yeah. But then I remember he walked. He'd walk every morning. It was really good for him. He'd take them out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he'd always walk with his dog. Yeah. Lady would be walking by his side.
Yeah. Old John Quinn Road.
Faithful animals.
So, what would be, when was the first time you got a horse? You were telling us that story
Well,
last
horses,
time we were
yeah, that's
there.
my father used to like to bring home dogs. He had very lots of variety of dogs to bring home. Toby was particularly maybe my dog, but he would bring home dogs, big dogs, little dogs. And we made last to bring home cats.
Cats.
I used to have love all these little kittens he'd bring home. I would wrestle with those kittens, and oh my mother used to think you're going to drive those poor cats crazy. But and then my father grew up, of course, driving horses. Actually, my father, if you want to really go back in time, back in the day when they used to deliver milk in Ottawa, house to house, they'd have a horse, and they had milk, cold milk bottles, glass milk bottles that they would deliver. Father would take a bottle out of the back and walk up the lane to this place house, and they'd say, you know, one milk, two milk, or whatever, and make the transaction. The horse would stand back there on the sidewalk, and so my father did that in Ottawa. Up and down the streets of Ottawa, these horses were trained. They knew where to go to the next house, up and down the
Wow.
streets. So his love for horses, he grew up with horses, was very, very close. Even though they got the old cars that would drive them around, they still had horses. My grandfather had horses even
Mm.
before people were starting to buy tractors, but he was always behind time by several years.
Hmm.
Always had a big team of horses that would pull the hay wagons and do all the plowing.
Now,
I
was
remember
this
my
the farm? This was like where Grandpa lived on John Quinn Road, or was this a different?
Yeah, down the John Quinn Road, the old homestead, the
Oh, yeah.
Wallace homestead. I remember my grandfather. They would spread the manure out in the fields in the wintertime.
Hmm.
And so what they would do is they would get the hood of an old car, like an old car, like a 1950 or 49 or 48, some old junker, and they'd take that hood off. And it was kind of rounded at the front and was like a sleigh. And they would hook up the horses to this sleigh, and they used to call it a stone boat, but it was actually the hood of an old car. And so they would throw the manure out on these old hoods of old cars, and then they would hook up the horses and drag that old sleigh out into the field and fork the manure off into the fields. It was a pretty manual job.
Wow. Yeah.
But my grandfather, he'd say, "You want to go for a ride?" And my ride was on the manure pile. All the cow manure, you know.
Oh man, just with
So I
your
get
wasn't
this was
frozen or
my
anything.
no, it wasn't frozen by any means. There's still steam coming off it,
Oh.
and I would go out on that. That was a big thrill, you know. The team of horses out pulling you across the snow and through the snow, and I guess I probably got off after. I don't know, maybe he held up. We stood up on it. You couldn't sit down on it anywhere because it was just like a sleigh, and he must have held on to me because it would jerk to get going. And of course, whenever I came home from the farm, my mother, oh, it just smelled like the barn. You know, it had cow manure all over me.
Ah, I guess so.
It was a small matter
Uh,
for a boy
yeah.
out there riding through the fields and a big team of horses pulling you. So that was one part, going to Grandpa's place with the horses.
Yeah.
And then my father, I don't know how old I was then, maybe 8 years old or something. He crossed the field from where we lived. There was an old barn. Yeah, not a very big barn, but like a kind of like a maybe the size of a small garage or something. And it was made out of like logs and had a roof and everything, but it was just sitting there empty in the field. And he asked the guy, phoned, he said, "You think I could drag that old barn over to my place?" And the guy said, "Oh, I guess you can have it as long as you can get it there on your own." So my father, I guess, and some friends, they put stuff underneath it and got tractors and dragged it over through the back field over to where we lived on our property in the little place in Greeley, kind of a real rural town, well, not a town, a village. And so he started renovating it into a little stable. So he said, Jerry, we're gonna get a horse here. We're gonna get a horse. And he made a little corral and got a water trough, and so we made some stalls in the little barn, and we had a little over top of the stalls a place where they would put hay, and then another side of the barn there was a little opening where they kept all the feed for the horses. And so sure enough, one day he got a horse and brought it home to our. It was a pretty exciting event.
Yeah, a lot of the build up to it.
I don't remember actually what the horse was. I remember what the first horse was. He brought some weird horses home. He had bought this great big horse. It was what they call a Clydesdale. You've probably seen them. They got big feet, big white hairy feet, and very, very big manes, and they're a huge horse, huge monsters. You couldn't ride the thing because the backs are so wide. Your legs you'd have to do the splits to try and get on them. They were so big.
You'd have to ride English style.
Yeah, but I would get on them, sit up on them there. Like the big Clydesdales were very, very tame, very mild horse. And now when we had that horse for a while, then he would sell it, and then he'd buy another horse, and he'd always say to me, like before even we had the horses, he'd say, Jerry, you want to go for a ride in the car and we'll go look at a horse? And I guess this was always these times he was always contemplating about getting a horse. I always figured he just liked looking at them. Till the day we actually did bring one home. And then, this is a story I did for Hunter Huntley Street. So we used to go to the sale barn, which was up the road, and there was a big cattle place called Leo's Livestock just outside of Greeley. And it was a huge, big barn. Well, of course, I was a little boy. It probably was bigger than it is now. And it had all these stalls in there, and it was all full of cows and all kinds of animals that they would bring in to sell, farmers to buy or to go to the meat market. And usually on a certain night of maybe the month, they always had horses for sale. My father always liked to go that night to see the horses. Well, who had a horse for sale and what horses were for sale? And there'd be a big corral full of all these horses that were trying to sell, farmers trying to sell a horse, buy a horse, all kinds of men standing around talking. Kind of like probably a car lot today now, where they would all bring their cars and try and sell them. It was quite a community function, it was a big event. And up above the corrals below, there was all these walkways, so you could walk along up atop, and you could look down into these corrals and see what was in them, without actually trying to get into the corral from down below. Because there was always animals moving up and down these alleyways, bulls and cows, and I was always afraid of those bulls running up and down. And they would go into a place at the end where they would be the auctioneer, and the auctioneer would be down there. All the farmers would sit around in kind of a half circle and on these round benches, and give me 80, give me 500, 500, do I have 5? All these farmers sitting around. And so this one night, we went to the sale barn, and of course there was the horses for sale, and while we were walking around, I wasn't really too interested in some of the horses. And one time I jumped up on a horse. The guy who had a horse there for sale, and it was a tall riding horse. And he said, "Oh, this horse is a good horse, great horse, and he said, "Boy, come on, jump up here." So I got up on this big, tall horse. And I'd been riding a little bit of my dad's horses, Wasn't by any means an experienced rider, probably 10 years old. And I was sitting on this horse, and you kind of, when you've been around horses after a while, you kind of learn that they have their own personalities. Some of them are jittery, and some are calm, and others are kind, and others are snappy. I don't know, not like human beings, I guess. And so I'm sitting up on this big, tall horse, holding onto its mane, and I'm feeling it's where my legs are around it. It's starting to shiver, and I looked down at its eyes, and the eyes were really big. They weren't calm, kind of half closed, but they were just kind of bugging out of its eyes. And I thought, oh, this is a nervous horse, And he kept on. Then he would jerk his head up, he's trying to get up, and the guy that was trying to sell him, he got a hold of the rope around the horse's neck, and he would jerk on and pull on the horse's head to keep it down. And of course, that would cause a reaction to the horse, and he would pull harder on the guy's rope. And so this is I'm up on the back, and he's kind of doing this battle with his jerking up and bow, and I'm thinking, this is not looking very good right up here. Of course, all the other men are standing around watching him as he's trying to sell this horse, talking about how good it is, runner, and it's really fast, and da-da-da-da, good legs, and nice teeth. And then the horse jerked really, really hard, and the guy that had a hold of the rope, he lost grip of it, ripped it right out of his hands. Of course, then the horse went up on its hind legs, and, and it was starting to paw the air, like, you see on one of those Mustangs on the TV show. It's standing on its back legs, and its front legs are up in the air, and its hair, it's up, kind of gone wild. Well, in the meantime, I'm on its back, and it's standing on its back legs.
Yikes.
And I'm thinking, what do I do up here now? If I try and hang on, where's it going to go? And then it lost its balance. I guess the guy maybe had a bit of a grip on the rope, and he lost the rope, and the horse started falling backwards, literally falling all the way backwards with me on top of it, and it was just a mercy of God, today, because it could have been killed, it could have been crushed under that thing. The horse weighs.
Where's Poppy during all of this?
Well, Poppy was probably freaking out at the side, all happened so fast, and that horse fell right back on its back, right on its head.
Oh.
And I had slid down its back, like went flying down off its back. And I went flying, and the corral was all full of these horses, like their rear ends were all facing where I was. And I went rolling in underneath their feet.
Oh,
all these big horses.
Could have been kicked in the head.
Well, a horse normally won't kick, like if it's, a horse is pretty gentle even if you fall under it.
Mm.
So they just kind of all scooted around. Fortunately, I didn't get stepped on. And next thing you know, my father had me by my arm, and we were flying out of there. I think he said something on the way home. Don't tell your mother what happened. But anyway.
She wouldn't let you go back.
And I don't think that farmer got to sell that horse that night.
I guess not.
I think they probably looked at him like, hey, your horse is a killer, man. We're not getting anything for that thing. So that was one of my episodes in the sale barn.
So you didn't buy a horse that day?
I have another one that it's a little kinder and sweeter story, and that's the story of Ruby. And that's the story I've done on Hunter Huntley Street for the kids. And it's a real sweet story because my father said, well, let's go to the sale barn, Jerry. And of course, at that point in time, we kind of learned our lesson about jumping up on wild horses. And he was looking at horses, I guess, and I was running up and down the alleyways up these gangplanks up above, having lots of fun running all over the place and looking down. I used to look at the bulls and throw sticks and stones at them because they were all tied up with the rings in their nose and monsters of beasts. And so I was running around up there, and I looked down, and there was a big corral full of baby calves, like white and what they call Holstein calves. And they would be like pretty well newborn calves. The farmers would do that often. They would take as soon as the mother had the calf, they would take her and take that calf and sell it at the sale barn. And they'd pretty well be all taken for a meat, turned into veal or whatever in a place in Montreal. So I was running around there and looking down at the calves, and I saw this black thing in the middle of all these black and white little calves. They were all like, "Mwah, mwah," they all wanted their mother. It was a noisy place full of all kinds of cows and mooing going on. And I looked down and I thought, what in the world was that down in there with those things? And I went running, got down the stairs and went down this alleyway, made sure there was no bulls coming, and climbed up on the fence to look climbed up on the corral, stalls to look in there. And there was probably about 50 or 60 little calves. They're all crowded in there, like tightly packed. And they're all just making the mooing sound. And I couldn't believe what was in with them. And I went and I found my father. And I said, Dad, you got to come here and look with me. And sometimes my father would be in a conversation with somebody, some other farmer. And whenever you come and bang on his arm or drag him and trying to, Jerry, what are you doing? I'm talking here, Jerry. And so after these persistent cries from me, I finally got my father said, "Come and look, Dad, come and look." He said, "Well, what are you looking at?" And he said, we're not here to buy anything. We're not looking at any horses. I said, "Well, come and look at this." So I finally dragged him along and pointed into the corral, and he looked in there and he said, "Well, what in the world, Jerry? Look at that thing." And he crawled over the fence, over the corral, got in with all those calves, pushed them all aside. And there was a newborn little filly. And a little filly is what they call a girl baby horse. And she had long legs. She had a white spot on her nose, little white feet. And she was just brand new born, like still this newborn hair on her. Hardly could stand up. And there she was within all these calves, just standing there wobbling, totally out of place. And my father leaned down and grabbed her legs and looked at her, and he said, "Jerry, this is a beautiful horse. This is it's a beautiful riding horse. It's going to be a big animal." I said, "Well, what is it doing in here, Dad? What are they going to do with it?" And he said, "Well, Jerry, I don't know, maybe the mother got sick, or the farmer or whoever was with him, he didn't want this thing anymore, or maybe thought she would die. And she's just here to they're going to take her away probably and be made into dog food." I said, "Oh, Dad, that's terrible." What? He said, "Well, I know, that's terrible. She's a beautiful little animal." He said, "But she would require an awful lot of work, Jerry. You'd have to feed her with a bottle, and it's a lot of work. They drink a lot. Probably have to teach her to eat." So she doesn't have her mother to feed her. And so he crawled up out of the corral and he said, "Well, let's go down to where all the animals are, where they sell all the animals, into the auctioneer place." And so we didn't normally go there because we normally didn't buy anything. Father didn't go in, but in the auctioneer, what you would do is you'd get a number, hold it up, and the auctioneer was in a corner there and a microphone, and boy, he could talk fast. Wow, just like you could hardly understand what they were saying. They were going so fast. So we're sitting up there with all those farmers, and they're buying bulls and cows, and then here came in all these little calves with the little filly staggering in there with them. And there was a guy usually on the side when he had a big white coat on. He was what they, I guess you call the meat man. He would buy all these calves and put them in a transport, ship them to a slaughterhouse in Montreal. And so they were all there, and he says, "Oh, okay, and they would sell them by pound or whatever. I don't know how they did, but the meat guy really wasn't interested in the filly. He was just interested in cows. So my father said, "I'll buy that filly." And of course, there's nobody interested in buying her. I don't know. I think my father maybe was the only bid. I mean, he might have bought her for $5 or $10.
Wow.
I said, "Well, Dad, what are we going to do?" He said, "Well, we're going to take her home, Jerry." And we just had a little four-door Ford Fairlane, little square car, not very big. And so we dragged her out got a piece of baler twine and some rope, put around her head. And my father pulled her, and I kind of pushed her. She wobbled along, and we got her in the back seat of the car with her. I was holding onto her head so she wouldn't jump in the front. Kind of pushed her down so she sat in the back. And on the way home we went with this prized beautiful little filly. Oh my, what a treasure. I was so excited. She was such a beauty. Oh my, me holding on to her in the front there. And before she got home, she got named Ruby. I think my father named her Ruby. Not too sure why. A lot of horse names got back there from different reasons. So when we got home, here was the big surprise. He said, "Go in the house and tell your mother to come out and see what we got in the car." So this was the surprise for my mother. So I went running in the house just like, man, I had one, free trip to Disney World, jumping around, screaming and yelling and laughing. And, come, Mom, I grabbed my mother by the apron and dragged her out. She was like, "Oh, dear Lord, what's my husband brought home this time? Chickens." He would bring home chickens and cats and another dog and who knows what "What do you got now?" And she looked in the back seat and said, "Oh, land." So here are words saying, "Oh, land sakes alive. What have you got there?" And then right away my father says, "Well, Joyce, you're going to have to get a big bottle, the biggest bottle you can get, and get some milk in it and heat it up. This thing's going to starve to death." So I'm not too sure who took care of that little filly on the journey up, because I might have fed the thing. She's pretty vigorous, when a little filly, when she's thirsty, boy, they bob their head around, send the bottle flying. I don't know what kind of nipple my mother must got, but it probably wasn't like a baby nipple, because they could drink a half a pail of milk, and then they eventually get to the place where they're not drinking out of a bottle. You teach them to drink out of a pail. And then I think we even fed her baby pablum, to make her survive, because that was just a survival thing, or she would die,
Right.
But she grew, boy, she survived and learned to eat, became this huge, beautiful riding horse, magnificent animal. Beautiful white markings on her nose and her feet. She was kind of a chestnut color, with a brown mane and tail. She turned out to be a very gentle horse, very, very gentle. And we had her for a while. We raised her from nothing, and people would come and look around and say, "Well, what a magnificent animal." And then my father said, "Well, somebody bought her, and she was gone." Another horse.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, my father bought me a pony. I guess maybe he knew we were going to sell Ruby, and maybe he was trying to
prepare you,
ease the impact of losing this precious horse they would raise. Actually, my sister Judy, she kind of liked the horses too. She used to come and hang out take care of Ruby when she was young. I don't know if she ever got into real riding or not. Some of the horses were very big, to ride. They were, like, we had a horse, I think, went onto the mounted police. That was the first horse. That was the first horse I got on, and it threw me off. I went flying in the air. My mother wasn't too happy when she'd hear about me getting
thrown off a horse,
bucked off. Here's a little kid just flying through the air, landing on your head.
Oh.
Off these big horses. So I had a lot of fun growing up with my horses, and they were a huge part of my life. Yeah, I
Yeah.
learned responsibility. I had to go out there in the wintertime, the stable, and clean them out. Horse manure in the wintertime, in a barn, oh, it's powerful smell. And you had to change your clothes before you went to school, if you went out in the morning.
Mm.
So they would need to be watered and fed and cleaned out. And my father would come home, well, did you get the horses cleaned out? No, I didn't, Dad. Sorry, You gotta clean them out every day. So there was responsibility I learned
Mm. Good
as a
life
young boy,
skills.
taking care of them. And they would sometimes they'd get out. Maybe I didn't fasten the gate tight enough or something. And one time I was in school, a teacher called and I had to go home. Horses were running up and down the road. I don't know how many horses we had that time, 5 or 6. Big.
Was a
I
bit
had
of
my pony prints, and oh boy, father kept on buying and selling.
it's his business, a part of his business. Buy and
Yeah, it was.
sell, buy and sell horses before he got into the buy and sell cars.
Yeah, well, he was doing that too, buying old beat up cars that hardly would run. And I think mother would be thinking, well, we could spend more money on the cars than we are on those stupid old horses. But I never heard her complain. Never heard her complain about the horses.
Oh, that's nice.
They filled up a lot of my days. My neighbors would come over. My father bought me a little buggy, a little 2-wheel buggy, and I hitch up my pony prints and run all over Greeley, up and down the roads, and take them for rides. And
yeah, outdoor living. That was the time when kids lived outside.
Oh yeah, nobody lived inside. We didn't know what a game was, Just go over to Jerry's and hang out with Jerry with his ponies,
Yeah.
I had a little red saddle. I'd put the kids on and take them for rides. Yeah, I was well, of course, the other kids, they had bicycles, but not too many of them had ponies. That was a pretty elite part of my life, as far as, because it was like a little barn in the village. Nobody had a little barn in the village.
Right.
There was a guy nearby. He had a little barn. It was on a little side street called Pig's Alley, and he had pigs in this barn, right? Like the barn was like right next to the alleyway, and always used to scare me, those pigs. And pigs are like this, kind of wild looking animal and hairy
Squealing
things, and you make that sound. So they'd be all us kids we'd go in there and try and sneak around, walk on top of the alleyways or on the fences of these pigs, kind of like a dare, Can you in there with the pigs? Because some of these pigs were huge, like huge pigs, like you ever fell in with one, you think it'd scare the life out of you,
Wasn't like Charlotte's Web.
Daring each other, to walk in there with these. Then there was always the glorious day when they were killed. Probably told you that story. That was all the pigs would be taken down to this place, and they would be run down. All their throats would be cut. All us neighborhood kids would line the little pathway where these pigs would run by, blood rushing out of their throats. Oh. And they would take them up, and there would be a big boiling pot, a huge pot.
Oh my goodness!
And they would hook the pig by its by its leg, and they would dip him down into this big boiling pot. And what it would do is it would take all his hair off him. Pigs are very hairy, coarse. And here's all us kids, neighborhood kids. It was like the neighborhood. It was like the local horror movie story, that they're going to kill the pigs today. They're going to kill the pigs. Mother would be like, "They're not going near there." Well, sure enough, there we were watching these. Dear Lord. Nowadays, it would be like,
well, they see those things
or
on TV now, pretty worse stuff. People killing people.
thinking about nowadays. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. It maybe didn't really. I don't know if I really had any bad dreams from it or not, but I still have this very vivid memory of the sound of that pig running by, and what it sounded like.
Oh. Form of trauma.
Of course, my father, everybody would be there. There would be, it was like a community. Everybody would get a chunk of a pig, take home, but in your freezer,
Mm,
So it's kind of like almost like a local meat market.
right.
Farmers did that all the time. They're not allowed to do that now. I don't think.
Right.
I mean, we bought well, we didn't. Well, we did buy. My father bought us a steer, and he said, "Well, we're gonna raise this steer, in with the horses, and we're gonna fatten him up, and we'll kill him." So he was a little black. I don't know, maybe like a Hereford thing. I think he had little horns on him. He didn't have big horns, but there were horns. So we'd put him in a stall and, rope around his neck, and I would have to feed him, get hay up to the front of him, but the stall was long and narrow, and you had to kind of go up beside him, or you had to crawl into the next stall and kind of lean down, and you would throw hay into him or whatever we were feeding him. And for some reason or other, he didn't particularly like me or anybody. And if you got anywhere near him, he would try and pin you with his head or squish you against the wall, try and kick you. He was just. And so my father, he said, "Well, that guy, we're going to call him Lucifer." I thought, well, that was an interesting name. That was like the name of the devil. We had the devil in the barn with us all the time. Of course, there's this little kid scared to death of this steer. Yeah, I don't know if I was really very too kind to it either. Maybe give it the odd poke with a fork to get it out of the way, or I still had to clean the thing up. But that was a big, pretty glorious day when they took Lucifer out, and I was there when I watched him
Get killed. So
take the gun and shoot him in the head.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Did he get really fat?
Yeah, we fattened him up. Yeah, he got quite fat. So we would have like a whole beef, like a whole cow, hamburgers and roasts and everything. My father was a firm believer in eating meat and potatoes every night. That was like, you had meat and potatoes. He came home from working jobs, long, hard days.
Mm-hmm.
Come home at nighttime tired, and he'd say, "Jerry, take my boots off." And I would take those big work boots on, lace them, and pull them off. And he'd usually lie down on the couch. We had a little couch in the kitchen. And he'd sleep for maybe an hour or something before supper while Mother was cooking. And then we would sit down, and there would be roast and lots of potatoes. We kept potatoes in the basement in the cold storage. You had to go out into the old country kitchen and open this big door and crawl down into a basement. It was very dark. It was one of those jobs I didn't particularly like because there was one little bulb hanging down in there. And the potatoes were way in the back in a pile. It was just a dirt floor. And the ceiling was really, really low. Even I had to duck from there, crawl along my hands and my knees. Damp and dark. Scary down there. Jerry, go get some potatoes. Patsy, go get the potatoes. No, I'm not going down there. I have a dress on. So that was
your
go
job.
down and get potatoes because Father wanted potatoes for supper. So we had potatoes. And a variety of, usually grew a huge garden every summer.
Even when you were
Potatoes.
young?
Oh yeah, potatoes fields.
Huh.
Felt like there was hundreds of acres of potatoes because I was the job, the responsibility, keep the potato bugs off and keep the weeds pulled. And
Wow.
I thought this is a job that no human being can do in a day. Of course, my friends would come around. Hey, Jerry, you want to go play? They were always riding up and down on the road on their bicycle or coming to visit me. Constant distraction. And then I would get in trouble from my father.
Laborious task of keeping the potato bugs off.
And he would be kind of not really gentle and yell at me, you know. What are you doing? Get those potatoes. We're not going to have any potatoes for this wintertime. And carrots and cabbages. And then he went into Marie's and started growing strawberries. Had a big strawberry field. We had a huge strawberry field. And then he started growing raspberries.
Wow.
We had a big raspberry patch. Tell you, there was no shortage of work for me whenever I was a kid. Didn't have to worry about soccer practice or hockey practice or what to do. Or I had to clean out the horses, make sure they were watered. And then there was one time there was a funny episode happened. My brother Mark was just born and he was in a hospital. And back at that day, when a woman had a baby, they usually kept him for quite a while, a week or two maybe even. So my mother was in a hospital. And I was about, how old would I have been? 12 years old maybe when Mark was born. So I was home alone, and it was like a summer's day, beautiful day. Well, when I think Mark was born, I don't know what time of the month, year, July, I think.
July, yeah.
But it got all, clouds got all dark, and it started just really storming, wild, like really, really scary. I was home alone, and it started to hail, like these huge hailstorms were coming down. I was in the house. I thought, man, this is scary. It was just beating, and they were starting to beat so hard on one side of the house that they literally smashed the windows of the house.
Oh, wow.
So the hail was just smashing down. It was actually broke the glass. The glass was all over the floor. Hail was bouncing all through the living room and through the kitchen. And I thought, what is going on? What am I going to do here? And then I looked out, and it was just coming down in sheets, just pounding down. And my poor horses were out in the field, and they were being beaten with this hail. And it was just driving them nuts. They were just running up and down, just flying here and there and everywhere. Because we didn't have a spot where they could win in the daytime.
Mm.
And I thought, what am I going to do? It was just like at the end of myself. So my sister Judy had this used to have these straw sun hats that were like huge, hung way out over your shoulders. I grabbed that thing and went running out into the field, trying to grab a hold of my horses to get them back in, at least get them in their stalls so they wouldn't be damaged, because it was really pounding down enough to smash the windows in your house. Finally, I don't know how far I got the horses in or what happened, but the hail finally went away.
Wow.
Father came home. Windows, they had a big job trying to fix the windows. It smashed all the glass all over the place. Yeah, some crazy episodes as a childhood.
I don't think we see hail like that now.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing hail like that. Well, it's nice to go down memory lane, hear some of those stories, and also hear a lot more about Poppy too, because I knew him obviously in his later years, but it's nice to hear about his early years.
Well, it's been nice chit-chatting about with you, and
yeah,
trust us all.
We'll pick up again.
It's been a pleasure.
Sometime soon, and thanks for taking the time, Dad.
All right, well, you have a good day too, and we'll talk to you again.
Okay. All right. Love you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.